LegalizeFreedom.com. Why are we here? Where do we come from? Where are we going? From the nature of reality to the future of humanity. Beyond politics, poverty and war. LegalizeFreedom.com.
Greetings and welcome once again to LegalizeFreedom.com. I'm your host Greg Moffat, and today we present part 3 with Jasun Horsley, discussing his book, Prisoner of Infinity, UFOs, Social Engineering, and the Psychology of Fragmentation. If you haven't already, it's strongly recommended that you listen to the previous segments first. Links can be found on this interview page at LegalizeFreedom.com, or if you're listening on YouTube, in the program information below. The interview resumes as we discuss how conspiracy theories affect the way we think about conspiracy theories. Did I tell you previously that I worked with David Icke for about a year on a casual freelance basis? Did I mention that before?
I don't think you did. I'd like to hear about that.
Well, there's a scene towards the end of I'm not sure if it's in the remake of the film, but in the original Invasion of the Body Snatchers, right at the end, and there's a guy who's running off. He's found, about the conspiracy and what's going on in his society, and he's running off in a mad panic to tell anyone who'll listen. He finds himself in the middle of a freeway, with all these commuters and stuff driving past, and he's, please listen to me. It's them, it's been them all along. They live, and blah, blah, blah. So that's how David Icke came across at first. And of course, I'm not sure where we're up to these days, but in recent years, he's certainly had a lot more attention. I don't know if you ever saw that documentary that I think Channel 4 made it. It was called David Icke, Was He Right? But a lot of the people that I met in his circle, shall we say, you're absolutely right. They had this sort of gestalt download of quote unquote information and knowledge, didn't know what to do with it, and actually did seem to be very disempowering. So not saying that they were necessarily empowered before, but even if David's intentions are benevolent, for many people, they giving them this information in sort of 9, 10, 11-hour presentations didn't seem to have an empowering effect. It's simply people disappeared down a kind of rabbit hole about, the cabal, the elites, the Illuminati, and on. And then it became almost like Grassy Knowlington in Viz Comic, who's the comedy conspiracy theorist. Conspiracies are everywhere, and you can't function anymore because you're wondering if the cabal, slip on a banana skin, it's the cabal.
Yeah. Well, you can't. You're split, I think. You can probably still function. In most cases, these people probably carry on functioning normally, but their attention is much less, it was probably less and less on the everyday, because as I say, they're either trying to find the conspiracy in the everyday, or they're just compartmentalizing, which I think is more common, and they're thinking about all the conspiracies that are going on, and ignoring what's going on in their everyday environment, because, that's not relevant. There's no evidence there. Actually, there is evidence for conspiracy in the everyday, but not in the sense that the Illuminati, used psychotronic weaponry to put a banana peel on the pavement kind of thing, right? It's obviously a lot more subtle than this. It's in our own thoughts and our own emotional reactions and our own behaviors, the secret, the story that our body's trying to tell, the trauma that's been put in us, the kind of cognitive, habitual cognitive patterns that we follow to try and understand and perceive the world. These are all evidence of, quote, the conspiracy, unquote. And so that's the dark irony of it is that, the very way we think about deep state social engineering programs, etc., has been influenced or compromised by these programs. And that's conspiracy theory in a nutshell. Like, we're thinking about the problem in the way that the problem itself has created for us to think about it, so we will never ever attain any kind of solution. Yeah, it'll just go round and round like a dog chasing its tail.
So at the risk of kind of repeating a point from earlier, these so-called stormers of heaven with their agenda or agendas, do they really need the rest of us, or do they just need us to just look elsewhere, not pay attention?
Right, so could they just wipe out 6 billion people and then they'd have a much better situation? Well, they certainly need slaves. They need people to, carry the things and build things and whatnot until they can get, Robo World up and running. And even there, they'd need human slaves to maintain the robots, I presume. So that's number one. They need physical workers to keep society running, including, to build their secret enclaves in Dubai or wherever. Well, Dubai's not secret, but maybe there's a breakaway civilization like Alex Jones claims. They certainly need workers. This is something I read about recently about the superhero movies, that all these superheroes like Batman and Black Panther and so on, they have these massive technological power bases, and you never see the workers. Like you don't see the workers on the Death Star, building the new Death Star, right? All of whom got vaporized at the end of that movie. But anyway, you don't see that. You don't see how much human power is needed just to maintain the Dark Empire. So that's number one. That's a very obvious thing. The other thing is much more subtle, which is, and you mentioned it, attention. The direction of attention. Like if you think of the magician, he's directing our attention away from what he's doing towards some trick so that we won't see the trick. But then he does need us to see the result of the trick, right? He's not just directing our attention away from what he's doing. He then has to bring it back to what he's done so that we'll be spellbound, right? So the magician does need an audience. I mean, obviously he there'd be no point in doing tricks if he didn't have an audience. And I think there's something in that. I do think that stage magic is very similar to, occultism. There's a reason why it's one word for these two different things, in that it is about managing perception and harvesting and directing attention. And I think that the mysterious X factor is that there's energy in attention. That somehow attention, where attention goes, energy follows. And if you think about a celebrity, for example, they have to get your attention and hold it, or politicians. But it's not just the attention. They want your money and your love. And so I suppose the simple answer is, if the elite didn't have anyone to rule over and control and manipulate, what would make them the elite? There'd just be a bunch of, people with no one to lord it over. They'd end up devouring themselves, presumably. I imagine. I mean, I think it's an impossible hypothesis or a proposition that there's something in the nature of elitism and control and power that requires subjects or victims. Just as in abuse, you need a victim. You can't be an abuser or a predator if you don't have prey. That's getting very basic, isn't it? We're talking about predators and their prey. And in that analogy, I think that what the predators prey on is life force, energy, and that attention is part of awareness, is central to that. So yeah, they're constantly manipulating our awareness and attention, but it's not just so that we don't see what they're doing. They also need us to see what they're doing.
In Gladiator, I'm trying to remember the characters' names. Like, this is Gladiator, the movie, of course. It's funny how often I come back to this all the time. I'm always making pop culture references, and there may be something deeper behind that, but it happens a lot. It's just amazing how many ideas and how much information there is contained in even the most banal popular culture. But though I thought Gladiator was pretty good. But is it the outgoing emperor, I think, at the early part of the film, when there's like who's going to succeed him, and he's talking to Maximus, who's the military leader, I want you to take over, must not be my son or whatever, because he is corrupt and weak. And Maximus is like, oh no, this is not for me. He says, but because you do not want this power, it's why it must be you. Because you don't want it. And it occurs to me that the true power is kind of not wanting power, or maybe perhaps just wanting power over yourself, which is kind of how I've characterized it. I've talked about power in the past. I said I've never wanted power over anybody other than myself. And there does seem, and this ties back to the sort of people, you made this comment earlier on about the sort of people who seek power, and what's their story? What's their background? What was their sense of powerlessness that's led to this craving?
Yeah, well, I think you have to reduce it to the people who attain power, because if you're going to talk about the people who seek power, then I would say that's everybody in the Western world. Now, you may qualify it there, as you did, to just power over yourself, but I'm not sure how you would separate power over yourself from power over others. I mean, I understand your point. You're talking about self-mastery in terms of being able to control one's own vices or whatever and not succumb to things and whatnot. But I do think that's the seed or the kernel of, that's still the will to power, trying to control one's own emotions, trying to be perfect, trying to be pure, trying to be good. I think all those things are also sourced in a formative childhood imprint, knowledge of good and evil, right? That where we got punished if we were bad and rewarded if we were good, but it was also confusing that we just couldn't figure out what we were supposed to do. So we internalized all that, and we ended up growing up like St. Paul, the evil that I don't want to do, I do, and the good that I want to do, I can't do. That's how it is for all of us, to one degree or another. And so we are seeking relief at the very least, and we correlate power with relief, even if, as you put it, we reduce it to power over oneself. That's the thin end of the wedge. Now, I would say that most, if not all people, whether they're conscious of it or not, they do want power over others. They want people to like them. They want people to validate them. We all do. We need it. Like a deep psychological level, we need it. And so the culture has imbued us with this idea that in order to get validated, in order to be happy, pursuit of happiness, we have to attain things in the world, and that's power. You think about it. Being popular, being rich, being successful, being talented, even being good. They've all somehow got conflated with power, or they've all been compromised or shackled to the will to power, or what Nietzsche called the will to power. So then you got to look at, the people who actually attain power and what makes them different. And it's coming back to this idea that only the powerful in today's world, not only the powerful, but the powerful in today's world are only powerful because they have such a profound drive for power that they'll do anything to get it. In other words, they have no moral compass to prevent them, or at least their moral compass takes a back seat. They know how to put it on hold. I'm not sure if anyone is like Hannibal Lecter, who just doesn't have any kind of conscience whatsoever. I suppose that would be the Antichrist if such existed. And I don't think he would be like Hannibal Lecter either. So I think we have these fantasies about these monstrous sociopaths. And even, I think, someone like Jimmy Savile or Harvey Weinstein or even Kevin Spacey, if you think about the characters he played, the sociopaths that we're allowed to identify by the culture, they're all kind of, I kind of knew that already. He obviously seemed like a creep. I think it would be a lot more shocking if we were to discover that Keanu Reeves or even George Clooney was committing horrific acts, because it would really throw a spanner in the works of our belief that we know how to tell a sociopath from a normal person. But I think by definition we don't. Right? By definition of a sociopath, or part of it, is they know how to use charisma. And that's because their drive to power is so profound that they will assume any kind of form they have to get it. But also, more deeply, that drive to power is sourced in the psychic fragmentation that generated a charisma, and that allows a person of that kind to switch, Jekyll and Hyde. They can switch from super loving and kind and compassionate and wise. Leonard Cohen is coming to my mind, but listeners won't understand that analogy. But anyway, I think there's evidence that Leonard Cohen was this kind of person. And then switch from that to being a monstrous, vicious, abusive personality when they don't get their way. And there are celebrities that this is known about, like Barbra Streisand. I've done a lot of reading about it. She's kind of known to be a monstrous person, although perhaps not widely, because, the spin has been good enough that she's hugely admired. But it's no secret that she's a sociopathic type. But I think there's many that it is a secret with, and they're more prevalent. And that allows us to maintain this illusion that it's possible to attain power just through being talented and diligent, working really hard.
Well, in this idea of an agenda or agendas being rooted in what you alluded to earlier, this quest for oneness or wholeness, there does seem to be something genuine in that, even if some of the drives pursuing it are damaging or misguided. This death of God and the birth of man to become God, a sort of a return home, a return to this wholeness. That's something I think a lot of people can identify with, and it finds correspondence in all sorts of spiritual traditions, that kind of in terms of why are we here? What is life? And that each one of us is a little part of the divine, and that we're seeking that realization again, that there is just one universal being and we're all a little part of it. That idea resonates strongly with me. It's something that I've felt and again found a lot of other people feel and think the same way, and I've tried to express it in different ways. And it's not a new idea at all. It's at the root, say, of so many things. It may seem very distant from a lot of our lives today and our realities. But so in all of this, what the scientists at CERN might be driven by, or what occult seekers might be driven by, or what some psychopaths in business and politics, what may be underlying their behaviors, even underlying their own potential trauma or powerlessness, is something that is kind of meaningful and real.
There are two ways of looking at it. Yeah, one could say that we're all unconsciously driven to heal, to become whole, because that's what the life force wants. It's trying to restore itself. It's just trying, the soul or the psyche is trying to land in the body, trying to be married to the body, for that divine union to occur. That is kind of innate in everything we do, however unconscious. So you could say, all of these misguided attempts, at the deepest level, they are an attempt to return to the truth. But one could also say that what the core of what these drives are is to prevent that from happening. To reify the individual self and make it sovereign, Luciferian, autonomous, independent entity that can rule in the hell of its own isolation from God, from the greater humanity and from the universe. That would seem to be the drive in a nutshell. And this can only happen through disembodiment, because as bodies, we are all connected, I think. I think that this is where it gets problematic when we talk about the idea of being all one. But that's a mental idea, and it will never be true mentally, because the mind itself is the means by which we experience the illusion of being separate, A, from the body, and B, therefore, from humanity or the earth or nature, and C, from God. It's a mental construct. But in the body, we can never be separate, because, bodies are part of nature, and nature is the universe, and nature is, well, how we want to put that. I don't want to, if I use words, then I'm falling into the very trap I'm trying to lay out here, or expose rather, which is that at a bodily level, therefore at a soul level, we're already one with each other and with God, because we can't ever not be, and God could never die. It's only this idea, the mind self, that has got so disconnected from the body and therefore from reality that it's lost a sense of God, and it can no longer believe in God. Hence you've got Nietzsche's idea that God is dead. But that's just an idea. It's a philosophical premise that, yeah, is very central to our culture and all the rest of it, so it's meaningful at one level. But at another level, it's entirely meaningless, as is the quest for wholeness, I think. This is the weird paradox, is that in a certain sense, the quest for wholeness is the only thing that prevents us from being whole. But that's insofar as it's paradoxical, because the quest for wholeness is the evidence that we're not whole. Like there's a part of us that isn't home and it's trying to get home. But that part is doing it, as you say, in all the wrong ways. So that part just has to surrender and give up and trust that the shepherd will find it. It's the lost sheep. Have faith. And then it's over. You know, it's got nothing to do. It just has to wait. And then there's a natural order of things that as long as we cease, or the moment we cease preventing that natural order from being, or the moment we cease preventing our awareness from being suffused into that natural order of things, then it happens. It's the journey of zero distance. So I think that what you're zeroing in on there is, I mean, it's obviously it's a very key thing, because, yeah, you could say, well, there's a true yearning behind all of these pathological drives, and you could say there's a truth behind all of these distorted philosophies and beliefs. But on the other hand, that truth isn't a mental one, it's not a conceptual one, it's not an idea, it's a lived reality. And until we're experiencing it, we can't talk about it. We can, but we won't be talking about it. It's the Tao, you know? The Tao that's named isn't the Tao. So if we're talking about the idea of being one, we're not talking about being one. We're just talking about the idea, and that's going to keep us out of it more than it's going to lead us back into it. So that's very much what part 2 of Prisoner of Infinity is laying out, is all these counterfeit narratives that seem to correspond with a possible true lived reality, as in a reality that it is possible for us to live and experience. They're narratives that correspond, but they're not testimonials. They're not people who've experienced it, who are generating the narratives. They're either people who genuinely want to experience it and so have deluded themselves into thinking they have, or they're people who have cynically given up on ever getting to experience it, and so they have malevolently created counterfeit versions to trick people and lure them into it, so that they can have company in hell, so that they can rule in hell, because to rule in hell you need subjects to rule over. So that's something very different. That's what generates the prisoners of infinity. Either we do it to ourselves through delusion, or we get lured into it, and it's a bit of both and, by others who have, I guess, succumbed to an even greater delusion, which is that God is dead. There's no meaning or truth in the universe, so they just worship themselves, and then they want to trick others into worshipping them. They want to fill the void that's created by the death of God. There's a lot of thoughts there. Hopefully they make a coherent picture. I think the one I wanted to reiterate at the end is there's a world of difference. There's an abyss, really, between a concept or an idea about something and the lived reality of it. And we know that about a nail or an apple or a wife or a partner or something. The idea doesn't satisfy. And yet somehow, when it comes to the ultimate reality of God, we don't acknowledge that. We somehow think the concept is enough, as opposed to the lived reality. I guess because at some level we do feel that God is dead. We've given up on this idea that God is a lived reality, that we can be saved by. I'm ending on a very Christian note there, but I do think there's a profound correspondence between the Christian configurations and the reality, which is sort of contradicting what I'm saying. I'm not saying that being a Christian is the answer, because that can risk then, again, mistaking the dogma or the doctrine for the lived reality. But just insofar as there's that correspondence between ultimate oneness of being, as you say, being attainable to us only through faith and surrender to it, rather than using the will to try and attain it, because and it's there, if we're just honest about it. If there is ultimate oneness of being, which corresponds with, the word God, then we're already it, by definition. God is us, even if we, we're desperately trying to have that experience. Well, we don't have to, Why do we have to? Because if that's the underlying reality of being, why should we need our minds to experience it? We really don't, and they never will. But our bodies are actually in the flow of that experience all of the time.
I'm reminded of the phrase, the map is not the territory.
Yeah.
I'm just going to reminisce about an experience I had, and you can respond to it in any way you want. A few years ago, I had a sort of past life hypnosis regression session. One of the things that came to me during that was about why I was here, or why we're here, but obviously it was in that context, it was about me as some kind of individual, separate from you or anyone listening to this. And the phrase was, again, this was sparked by something you said a few moments ago, watch and wait. That was what I was to do, not to scramble around, not to seek to pursue, to get, to gain, to chase, to master. It was watch and wait. That was a very strong thought that obviously when I was in that state, that seemed to be somehow very important.
Well, it was a truth. I was trying to remember the exact word. I made a video for my niece when she turned 18. It was 18 things that I wish someone had told me when I was 18. But anyway, one of them, points they were called, one of them was, all you have to do is show up and pay attention. So I thought I would add that, because the watching and waiting is very passive. And I do believe there is an active element, which is this show up, that we need to show up in every given moment. We need to there is an element of will that isn't, isn't mind-based and isn't power-driven, I think, which is a willingness to be present. And so I think life is constantly opening doors for us, or presenting opportunities for us. Just as now we're having this conversation, you say something, and then there's a pause, and I know that I'm supposed to say something. I have to show up, but be paying attention also. Paying attention to what I'm saying and what you're saying. But it's still, it does strip things to almost nothing. Just show up, and then, as you say, watch and wait.
Yes. Well, it's a popular idea in alternative history and research circles, that there was some kind of antediluvian disaster that befell humanity, encapsulated in the idea of the fall of mankind, and that this sort of early trauma, unintegrated, unresolved, is behind all of human history and experience, and explains a lot of our kind of dissatisfaction and dysfunction today. This is encapsulated in ideas, like Atlantis, for example, or some kind of planetary disaster that almost wiped out the species. And I've read a lot around that over the years, but reading your work, I've begun to ponder, is that essentially possible? But are we perhaps, I'm not saying that any of these physical events haven't occurred. Who can say? That's an open question at the minute. But is there some kind of element of this to do with the human psyche, the collective consciousness, collective unconsciousness, or whatever? Is there a mental or spiritual dimension? I don't even know the right words to use, but is there perhaps something to this that is subtly or perhaps even profoundly different from the avenues of paths of exploration that I've previously gone down with this?
Well, I think I do speculate a bit about it in the book, but that's all it is, speculation. It's definitely not my area of interest or expertise. But I think where I go with that is that I think there is a case to be made, or at least I think it's a model that's workable, that humanity has evolved, the consciousness of humanity has progressed into an increasingly individuated state. So what we now think of as the unconscious juxtaposed with the ego, I think it may have been very different in the past. I do write about this in Prisoner of Infinity, don't I, referencing Julian James's bicameral mind and his theory that I think probably even just a few thousand years ago, but certainly anyway in previous period in humanity's history, human beings were A, much less conscious of themselves as individual beings, i.e. much less self-aware, and B, as a result, or corresponding with that, experiencing themselves much more as a collective. So telepathically connected is how we would look at it now from an ego's point of view, but actually it would be back to my point about bodies all being part of a continuum of nature, just as, cats all partake of a collective cat soul. It's quite platonic, isn't it? So human beings also, but that it's only relatively recently that I think that we've individuated, in quotes, not perhaps in a true Jungian sense of becoming autonomous, but in the sense of experiencing ourselves as isolate and separate. I think that that's a relatively recent development, and that I'm not quite sure how I would argue this historically, but there's some sort of correspondence there with hardship. The way in which that isolated identity self developed corresponded with a particular period of hardship, so that the trauma model that I lay out in Prisoner of Infinity is that the ego identity or the false identity is generated through trauma as a defense against that. So I think that there's probably a way to extrapolate that to the whole of humanity, that we have developed these isolated ego identities selves as a response to trauma, but that is both individual in terms of our individual lives, which go back to our childhood, but also collectively. But some sort of collective trauma generational, what's the word there, trauma genetic experience has been the way in which human beings have emerged from this more collective or group mind or group soul experience of ourselves into these more individuated selves, and that this is some sort of journey of consciousness that we're on currently that is leading to some kind of endpoint. I think that's where we've got these ideas of historical time having a beginning, a middle, and an end, which is in the Bible. Obviously, you've got the Garden of Eden, and then you've got the middle bit, and then you've got the apocalypse at the end. I think that's mapping a journey of human consciousness from a collective paradise to this individuated self that's trying to obey God and trying to find God and all the rest of it, but failing, to the wrath of God, the day of judgment and the revelation, where we then rediscover ourselves as one collective through union with Christ. So apparently there's some sort of evolution there whereby the togetherness we enter into, or the oneness at the end of this traumatic individuatory journey, is more complete than the one that we started in, but I don't know. I think, again, the individual life, one could see that, as we talked about initially, that if a person experiences trauma but then heals the trauma, they do perhaps have a kind of wisdom and depth that they wouldn't have had if they hadn't undergone the trauma. So I think there is something basic about being united, child in the womb, separating traumatically, and then somehow reuniting, not with the mother, of course, but with one's own partner, creating another life through union. There seems to be something that is cyclical there, that can occur in the human psyche and in the human life, that perhaps has occurred for humanity at large.
Well, Jason, we're going to leave that question hanging for the time being. Today we've been discussing your book, Prisoner of Infinity, UFOs, Social Engineering, and the Psychology of Fragmentation. We're going to return to this in a third part where we will be dealing with transhumanism and space exploration and what the future might hold, amongst other things. In the meantime, Prisoner of Infinity and indeed your other books are widely available. Before we sign off, however, just share with listeners details of your website. And as you mentioned at the top of the show, you also do a podcast of your own.
Yeah, my website is auticulture.com. That's A-U-T-I culture. And I have a weekly podcast called The Liminalist, the podcast between, where I talk to all kinds of different people, including readers and listeners. So I welcome any kind of feedback or correspondence via my website. Always happy to talk to people who are interested in what I'm doing.
Splendid. Well, Jason, once again, thank you so much for joining us again today on legalizefreedom.com.
Well, thank you, Greg.